Thailand. This is
Sorry. Okay.
should we start? Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
You are the chair.
Thank you. So, Excellencies, Madam Executive Secretary, distinguished delegates, so the Commission will now consider Agenda Item 2C, Catalyzing Climate Finance and Investment. So the document pertinent to this agenda item is ESCAP/79/2, Summary of the Theme Study on Accelerating Climate Action in Asia and the Pacific for Sustainable Development. The Commission's consideration of this agenda item will be facilitated by opening remarks, followed by a moderated panel discussion. So I will then open the floor for brief country interventions. So this session will explore different approaches to help economies in the Asia-Pacific region to transition towards net zero emitters across various sectors with a focus on financing these transitions. A follow-up discussion will take place this afternoon from 1:30 to 2:30 in the meeting room A, level 1, to discuss how to prepare better investment-ready pipelines in this region in order to increase the likelihood of accessing funds by member states for climate action projects. At the outset, I am pleased to invite the Executive Secretary, Ms. Armida Alishabana, to deliver opening remarks. So, Madam Executive Secretary, you have the floor.
Excellency, Madam Chair, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed, it is indeed my pleasure to welcome you all to this special session on catalyzing climate finance and investment, and the second edition of the Asia-Pacific Regional Forum on Climate Initiatives to Finance Climate Action and the SDGs. This second edition follows from the first forum last August, which discussed investment-ready climate initiatives in member states, together with the Egyptian presidency of COP27 and the UN high-level champions for climate action. The gap between what is needed to finance climate action and what is available is indeed very serious. The global transformation to a low-carbon economy is expected to require investment of at least $4 trillion to $6 trillion a year. The challenges are many: rising inflation, high indebtedness, and a projected economic slowdown across the globe limits the supply of finance. Rising poverty and inequality puts additional demand on finite public and private resources. But ensuring financing for climate action is not a zero-sum game. Effective national policies and regulations can, in fact, lower the cost of financing and increase the supply of funds for climate action. Financing climate action, in turn, strengthens poverty reduction and can enable a just transition. But delivering such financing from public, private, and other sources requires a transformation of our entire region's policies, regulations, and financial systems. This requires new ways of thinking and new forms of financing partnerships. It means thinking about risk and returns differently, moving away from short-term gains and incorporating long-term horizons. It needs new dialogues between policymakers, regulators, investors, and businesses, basically all the relevant stakeholders, on preparing long-term projects that help countries transition to net zero while meeting the needs of all stakeholders and ensuring that the transition is just and fair. This is certainly not an easy task. We must ensure that our region transitions in time to meet the Paris Agreement goals and that it stays on this different path for the longer term. But staying the course requires sustained, long-term political as well as substantive support from all stakeholders concerned. ESCAP has already been actively working in supporting our countries in technical assistance, policy support, as well as sustainable finance. Together with our partners here, including the UN High-Level Climate Champions, we look forward to doing more as the clock ticks, and we stand shoulder to shoulder with our partners to support our region in accelerating financing for climate action. So I look forward to hearing the views, your further deliberation, including from our distinguished panelists on how we as a region can rise to meet the need of the hour and how we can truly transform the way our region meets the finance needs of this transition. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Executive Secretary, for your opening remarks. May I now ask the conference room officer to play the video of the message from His Excellency Mr. Wael Abdelmakht, Special Representative of the President of the 27th Conference of the Parties of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change.
Distinguished participants in the second edition of the Asia-Pacific Regional Forum on Climate Initiatives to Finance Climate Action and the SDGs. It gives me great pleasure to address this important forum in my capacity as Special Representative of the COP27 President. In the run-up to COP27 last year, Egypt's presidency was pleased to partner with the UN Regional Commissions and the UN Climate Change High-Level Champions in organizing a series of 5 regional forums aimed at accelerating public and private investment in concrete, investable climate projects. The vision of the Egyptian COP presidency is based on a firm conviction that we need to move from pledging and promising towards full, timely, and at-scale implementation on the ground. This can only be done through translating commitments into concrete new initiatives, as well as through scaling up and replicating success stories on dealing with the negative impacts of climate change. In our view, the regional forums directly contribute to this implementation goal through direct engagement with a broad spectrum of partners and stakeholders, including representatives of governments, multilateral and private financial institutions, and the private sector. The first edition of regional forums co-organized by the Egyptian and UK presidencies in collaboration with UN regional commissions and the climate champions witnessed the presentation of a number of concrete projects ready to be financed. A number of these projects were included in the UN Compendium of Climate-Related Initiatives, Opportunities for Climate Finance and Investments in the SDGs, published last year prior to COP27. The deliberations in the forums rightly emphasize the essential role of public-private partnerships in the mobilization of climate finance. This year, we are pleased that COP28 presidency has joined this significant initiative, and we look forward to convening a successful second edition of the forums. In conclusion, allow me to once again stress what we as COP27 presidency have reiterated time and again. Our success in the fight against climate change depends heavily on the availability of predictable and adequate climate finance. Private finance certainly has an essential and indeed a transformative role in this regard, but this private finance has thus far not been incentivized to the extent needed and remains almost exclusively focused on emission reduction projects, where there is a clear business model ensuring a return on investment. Adaptation and resilience finance still lags far behind and will therefore continue to need creative thinking if we are to address the urgent adaptation needs of developing countries. Furthermore, this and other forums need to be cognizant of the importance of concessionality, since many developing countries already suffer from a heavy debt burden compounded by the fact that the cost of borrowing for these countries is much higher than it is for richer developed countries. With all of this in mind, We hope that participants in this forum will work together to identify and address financing bottlenecks and will hopefully develop creative, practical ideas building on success stories of private sector investment and sharing investment-ready climate initiatives and projects. I wish you all success.
Thank you, Ambassador Abdulmark, for your very strong message about climate finance. It is now my great pleasure to invite Dr. Mahmoud Muhyiddin, Special Envoy on Financing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and UN Climate Change High-Level Champion, to deliver remarks that will help set the scene for this session.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and I'm very pleased to join you in this very important discussion today. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm connected from Washington, D.C. I only wished that I can be with you as I did in our first engagement last year, which was very successful, and I'll be reflecting on this engagement that we had with ESCAP and its excellent team and the great facilitation that we had with the very professional staff from ESCAP in collaboration with the teams from the climate team, the climate champions team, and many others, including the presidency of COP27, COP26. And I'm happy that our work is going to be extended to serve the purpose and objectives of COP28 presidency to be held, the function there in the UAE in November and December. Very grateful as well to the great collaboration with the Executive Secretary, Ms. Armida, for her great work and support. And I'll be reacting as well to her very important introductory remarks with emphasis on issues related to business reforms to support the pipeline of projects. The second edition of the regional forum aims to facilitate financial close. By that, I mean to secure financing for as many of the financing opportunities collated as part of the first edition of the forums through the following. First, through conducting regional events, including dialogue on how to overcome hurdles in building the project pipeline in developing countries, involving all key stakeholders, and by providing tangible financing opportunities involving project owners and financiers. We aim as well to promote a subset of financing opportunities that are most financier ready with prospective financiers, commercial or philanthropic debt or equity investing. This will be through sessions at regional events and other outreach. We aim as well to build partnerships with philanthropies and others for technical assistance for project proponents to enable them to develop their projects to stage where they can confidently engage with prospective financiers. I like to emphasize here that the whole idea of this work is basically to make sure that the available and promised funding, including from the announcements by asset managers, asset owners, the members of the GFANs, which was announced during the Glasgow meeting in 2021, is going to be meeting the opportunities in the field where it matters. There had been always a claim that finance is available, but we don't have investable or bankable projects. So the exercise that we conducted with the regional economic commissions, including ESCAP, had proven that we have many opportunities in all areas of adaptation, mitigation, and with very strong development impact. Through the exercise, we have proven that climate finance is development finance. At the end of the day, the opportunities for funding in mitigation are addressing issues related to access to energy, in renewable energy in particular, and the efficiency that we need to have in the energy sector. In areas related to adaptation, we have seen many projects, again, with strong sustainable development impact, as we have seen in areas related to agriculture, water management, and food production. So we can really see that climate finance in its different opportunities is meeting the demands as well for development finance. The outcomes include Climate Champions expanded compendium that was just referred to by Ambassador Wael Abul Magd. We had 120 projects as examples of these opportunities in adaptation and mitigation. We presented 50 projects in the compendium in the Assets to Flows report, which was presented in Sharm el-Sheikh. In total, last year, we had 1,000 plus participants in our regional forums. 400 plus projects were presented, and we have as well, good to report, 7 deals almost closed, mainly in Africa. Today, without really getting ahead of the time, I'm happy to say that we are going to be discussing in the meetings today and identified 5 promising projects. They will have the private matchmaking session of these projects with 5 to 10 financiers, including commercial banks, the IFC, philanthropies, and without getting into the details of these projects, they vary really from different mitigation and adaptation opportunities and in different scales in 5 member countries of the ESCAP. What I'd like to conclude with is the following, and perhaps this is emphasizing the important points raised earlier by the Executive Secretary of the ESCAP, that when we do that, we're likely to see the broader reforms required to support the climate finance and development finance. This year is going to be witnessing very important summits, including in Paris in June, and then we have 3 summits at the margins of Anga. Matters related to the IFI MDB reforms are overdue, and we cannot just talk about reforms required at the country level, but the kind of reforms required for the IFIs to support the engagement at the country level. Finance is critical as well, not just for mitigation, which has been getting the majority of funding from the MDBs, but the Sharm el-Sheikh adaptation agenda is providing opportunities in different areas of finance, including agriculture, food system, water management, and dealing with the needs for desertification and dealing with deforestation. Developing countries face more significant distress in this year, and we wish to see more private equity participation and more of long-term finance in concessional terms. We argue that MDBs, the multilateral development banks, should extend concessional finance terms to middle-income countries as well as low-income countries when it comes to climate finance, with elements as follows. The interest rate should be concessional. It should be subsidized from the $100 billion committed back in Copenhagen, with a ceiling on lending to developing economies by no more than 1%. As I said, this could be subsidized from the $100 billion. We need a 10-year grace period, and we need a minimum of 10-year repayment period. And these terms, we can find them in many financial institutions today, but we need to extend them to middle-income countries and to make sure that climate finance and related activities in the development areas could be funded by these terms in order to ease the burden on the developing countries. To conclude, we aim to facilitate connections and exchange among project proponents and financiers, focusing on new financing opportunity in the ESCAP region. We need to expand the list of projects and of financiers and to advance their promising projects to the deals required and the opportunities that we'll be getting in Dubai. We may need to have more opportunities as well for funding, and we work here as catalysts to support the work going forward. Many members of my team are already participating in this discussion at the team of the climate champions, and I'm happy that Ms. Razan al-Mubarak, the climate champion of the UAE, is supporting as well this work. But as mentioned and in the introductory remarks by the Executive Secretary, enabling environment for finance to flow is very much required, and here the technical assistance from ESCAP and the partners will be very much needed. Project preparation is key for the realization of financial investments, and we need member states to support us in activating project owners that we can effectively meet the needs of the financiers going forward. So we have very promising pipeline of projects, and today we'll be seeing these opportunities realized, but we need to get that more into scale. It has been a great pleasure for me and my team to work closer with the team of the ESCAP, and we look forward to develop this work going forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Mohiuddin, for your insight for setting the tone of this session. With this, we have concluded the opening segment of this session, and I will hand over to Mr. Hamza Ali Malik, Director, Macroeconomics Policy and Financing for Development Division, UN ESCAP Secretariat, to moderate the panel discussion. So, Mr. Malik, over to you.
Thank you, Chair, for giving me the floor. It's an absolute pleasure and honor to moderate this session. So may I please request our distinguished panelists to come over the seats over there. Okay, to begin the discussion on catalyzing climate finance and investments, let me first start by inviting my colleague, Ms. Subha Sivakumaran, Chief of the Financing for Development Section, Macroeconomic Policy and Financing for Development Division, to give a short presentation, sort of scene setting, and share some of the key takeaways from our forthcoming report, ESCAP Financing for Development Series number 5, which this year has the theme of Sustainable Finance in Asia and the Pacific, Bridging the Gap. Subha, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, and esteemed panelists, and welcome to everyone joining us in person as well as online. Before we set out on what promises to be a very exciting discussion today, we'd like to offer some context around financing from our forthcoming report. As we have heard eloquently from so many speakers over the last few days, significant financing we know is required to achieve the region's climate goals. Some of these figures put forward by the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change include the following: 4 trillion per year through 2030 in renewable energy alone to reach the net zero emissions, an additional 4 to 6 trillion per year for the global transformation as a whole to the low carbon economy. And for developing countries, at least 5.8 trillion for the pre-2030 period to finance their NDCs. Now, while estimates vary on what is being spent so far due to the complexities of accounting for climate finance flows, nevertheless, they range around 632 billion per year between 2019 and 20, according to the Climate Policy Initiative, and in addition of the 100 billion promised by developed countries to developing countries. At the last count in 2020, 83 billion was mobilized. Now, these flows that are currently there are important and they need to be met. But nevertheless, in light of the trillions needed, they are still a fraction. And when we look at the macroeconomic landscape of our region, as seen in our Economic and Social Survey of Asia and the Pacific 2023, the environment is characterized by high inflation, rising interest rate, increased debt levels and associated vulnerabilities, and slower economic growth, amongst, of course, significant geopolitical uncertainties. These aspects profoundly affect the volume, the terms, and the costs of both public and private finance. So at ESCAP, we are putting forward a 10-point roadmap for the region to accelerate finance towards climate action in our forthcoming Financing for Development series in July 2023. Number one, for countries, this means the following. We need to engage in new climate finance partnerships that bring together governments, regulators, multilateral development banks, donors, and private finance to commit to action around specific goals. The Just Energy Transition Partnerships present positive lessons on partnership models for the region, which is led and owned by countries themselves. Number two, we also need effective NDC financing strategies with interim targets that lay a path to the end. They need to have clear resource mobilization plans and led by authorities within government with clear mandates. And related to the latter, significant policy coordination and coherence across finance, energy, transport, and environment, to name only a few of the relevant ministries, can significantly reduce delays. These reduction in delays reduces the cost of financing and, most importantly, streamlines financings towards where it'll have the most important impact on climate. Similarly, the clear and long-term signals from regulators around incorporating climate risks, introducing green standards, and incentivizing green financing will also reduce the cost of financing, especially for long-term capex-heavy financing. And number five, for countries, investment in the capacities of financial personnel is needed on assessing climate risks, innovating green financial instruments, and essentially navigating the path of the green economy towards transition. This sets the foundation for effective pricing and lowers the overall volume of finance required. Turning to private finance in Asia and the Pacific, it is clear we need much more private finance, particularly in financing the energy transition and in adopting new green technologies. We need meaningful commitment from private finance to commit to net zero pledges and build in interim targets, including before 2030, while we wait for 2050 or 2060. We also encourage private finance to participate in the early stage advising of green project preparation. And related to this, we need increased participation of Asian and Pacific investors in domestic currencies into such green projects. And our last 2 points, donors, multilateral development banks, and DFIs have an important part to play in supporting the preparation of especially small ticket green projects that later on become large ticket projects. And once these projects are prepared, we know that MDBs and other DFIs are rethinking their ability to expand the provision of concessional capital and financing, and this should be accelerated. Finally, across all these 10 points, we must not forget our duty to ensure a just transition, and we encourage public and private finance sources to structure, risk manage, and deliver finance, ensuring the just transition. With that, we look forward to sharing our report with you in July 2023 and taking these findings further. Thank you.
Thank you, Suba. Let me now invite Mr. Pekka Moren, the Special Representative of Finance Minister, Finland, and founding country of the Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Action, to share some context-setting remarks to guide the panel discussion. He joins us today virtually. Mr. Porin, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's really nice to be again with you. Unfortunately, cannot be there in person. But I am addressing you from Asia, from Central Asia, where we're discussing actually the same things here in Uzbekistan in the coming days. But thank you for the opportunity to address a few points to the panel. I'm going to touch upon a bit like a broader reform agenda and the systemic change that finance ministries are facing. And you will recall, of course, that Finland was the co-chair with Indonesia for 4 years and with Chile of the coalition. The coalition has grown, is becoming more relevant to the finance ministries and particularly so in the Asia where we see the coalition expanding further in the coming months. So thank you for your active engagement. The coalition is now with the capable hands of the Dutch and Indonesians. So Finland is contributing from this work from other angle. I'm going to actually present to you a couple of points building on also what other speakers have today said about the broader reform agenda. We have namely developed a framework guide for the finance ministries. It's a more than 200-page document involving more than 140 country examples about how to strengthen the role of economic, financial, fiscal policies in this area. So it is highly relevant on today's agenda. Let me say a few main points. They concern about actually the functions of finance ministries that they should have in place, and the guide specifies in quite detail about those different functions. But first one is more strategic function of finance ministries, about designing economic policy strategies and vision. It's about ensuring that country has in place robust economically founded mitigation adaptation policies that also take into account the just transition angles. It is the basis for the creditworthiness of a country, of any country, not depending on level of income or region. Second point is that, of course, the core functions of the finance ministry is about fiscal policy, taxation, revenues, budgets, expenditures, and to have in place tools and possibilities to design policies. Then we talk about modeling, we talk about data, budget procedures, and good governance in that context, whole government approach. And the last point, it has been referred to, but really it's the role of the finance ministries in creating the right environment for financing, regulatory systems, instruments, also making sure on their behalf that the full ecosystem of financial actors, public sector function well, and that the sustainable financial markets are being developed. But then my final points on the guide are actually about what will this all require to make this happen. Firstly, strong mandates. It requires mandates. This issue has been underestimated, underrated, because in many cases, it seems that finance ministries really don't play a major role in the climate space, even if they have the most critical tools. So that's point one. And the other point is really capacity and skill. So we need to work with our member countries, with institutional partners, those on the ground, like many UN entities, they are working with us. So we really put a lot of emphasis on training, capacity building, capacity development, ensuring that good research is available for policy designs for developing these functions in the finance ministries. And to take the guidebook into action, we are seeking for cooperation with entities like UN. As the coalition is growing, the regional context becomes more and more relevant. So we look forward to further cooperating with you. My final point is this. There will be, now that finance ministers last month in DC has actually launched this guidebook, there will be a global presentation of the guide in June, in mid-June, and I really hope to see you there. It's a public event, virtual event, so easy for you to access. But thank you very much. I wish you a good panel and look forward to hearing your thoughts. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moran. I really appreciate you joining us today. Well, now let me turn to the main panelists here. We have with us His Excellency Mr. Namge Shering, the Minister of Finance of Bhutan. We have His Excellency Mr. Nasir Ahmad, the Minister of Environment of Sri Lanka. We have His Excellency Mr. Seve Piniu, the Minister of Finance of Tuvalu. We have Her Excellency Ms. Chia Sere, the Deputy Governor of the National Bank of Cambodia. We have Ms. Shavinda Han Ratanakul, the Chairman of the Association of Investment Management Companies of Thailand. And we have Mr. Alexei Miroshny Chenko, the first Deputy Chairman of the Russian State Development Corporation, VEB.RF. And Mr. Koichiro Oshima, Managing Executive Officer of MUFG Bank, Japan. So we'll begin with an initial round of questions, and I request the panelists, the honorable ministers and distinguished panelists to stick to about 4 minutes or so, under 5 minutes for sure, and then circle back for follow-up questions, time permitting. We want to set aside considerable time for country statements to hear from the floor as well. So let me first ask our first speaker, Mr. His Excellency, Mr. Namge Shering. Your Excellency, the Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Action, from whom we just heard, outlines the important role that ministries of finance can play in supporting climate action. Bhutan, of course, is a leader in climate action and is the world's first carbon negative country. As the Minister of Finance, could you please highlight the main challenges that you have faced or are still facing in increasing finance for climate action? Please go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much, the Excellencies, distinguished delegates here, and of course the distinguished panelists. And thanks to the organizer, UNESCO, for giving this opportunity. I think when you talk about the climate financing, I think often when you touch on the climate topic, we basically talk about mitigation and adaptation. And when we talk about financing, it's more into adaptation. So to me, I personally feel that rather than adaptation, I think mitigation effort has to be taken seriously, and so that we are basically prioritizing our own commitment to this global cause over financing need. The main challenge that you have in Bhutan with regard to our growth prospects and the climate change actions is mainly with the lack of economic diversification. If you look into our key economic sectors, the key development priorities and the key development sectors in Bhutan are primarily dependent on the climate sensitive sectors. We are largely dependent on hydropower as a backbone of our economy, then the agriculture sector and the forestry sector. So hydropower, as you know, that we are subject to, this is at the mercy of the impact of the climate change. If we have a better hydrology, I think we have a better production, and hence the yield and the return on the economy is better. And same with the agriculture. And given the topographical location of the country, I think the impact of climate change into agriculture sector has been very, very eminent in the recent years. In terms of financing, I think on the public and private financing, in Bhutan, as far as possible, we're trying to mainstream the climate actions in all sectors. When it comes to budgetary allocations, for the information of the distinguished delegates here, I think the the government's budget contribution to GDP accounts for almost 38%, And most of the focus of these budgetary actions are mostly into the climate adaptations and mostly in agriculture sector, into the key economic sectors like hydropower and all. So basically, I think from the from the government financing perspective, we are doing as much as we can. But from the private side, I think, as you know, that the subject is fairly new, and people are yet to build their own capacity to understand the impact of the climate change. So I think we are trying to work closely with with the private sector to encourage them to increasingly take up the role in these climate actions. And from the government sides, we're trying to design some policy interventions, such as the fiscal policy interventions, giving some tax incentives, and of course, we are also getting on a path to green procurement system. So I think we see that the private individuals will increasingly take their part in the climate actions. But I think, lastly but not the least, I would say that I think the main challenges that is challenging our growth prospect is because Bhutan has a very strict conservation policy. So as long as I think a global community and the big players doesn't keep up with the commitment, we sometimes feel that in a desperate situation, probably our strict conservation policy needs to be relooked into and see if we can also make use of those the natural resources to build our own capacity and build our own wealth within the country. So for that, I would again reiterate, taking advantage of the platform, call for a global commitment to keep up with our mitigation efforts rather than pursuing too much in adaptation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Let me now invite our next panelist, His Excellency Naseer Ahmed, Minister of Environment, Ministry of Environment, Sri Lanka. Your Excellency, Sri Lanka has launched a climate prosperity plan at COP27, which is a roadmap to finance the net zero transition. The plan includes, among other things, restructuring debt, financing low carbon future, and social protection for a just transition. How is Sri Lanka responding to the increased need to finance climate action in current difficult macroeconomic conditions in the country?
Well, thank you. Distinguished panelists, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. As you quite correctly introduced, we are looking at a mix of strategies, and towards that, we are taking a number of initiatives. Of course, how Sri Lanka approaching the question of the increased need to finance climate action in the current macroeconomic climate. The key is the appointment of Green Finance Task Force by His Excellency the President to facilitate that this committee was appointed, and by the President to facilitate the process of sustainable financial tools. To complement that, Sri Lanka has sustainable finance roadmap to facilitate and promote sustainable finance practices. We also have our green finance taxonomy in place, which is aiming at promoting sustainable green finance activities based on the sustainable finance roadmap. Of course, with the technical support of ESCAP, I must thank the ESCAP for taking part in this initiative. The green bond framework is being finalized. We are also currently evaluating our proposal, our options to use debt for nature swaps. And here too, ESCAP and a number of other UN agencies are helping Sri Lanka. ESCAP has been supporting Sri Lanka on the development of Sri Lanka's sovereign green bond framework. the Green Bond Framework can assist in debt restructuring through a debt for nature swap in the short term and be utilized for future green bond issuance once debt sustainability is reached. Additionally, debt for climate swaps are another consideration, along with private sector financing options. So Sri Lanka is, of course, clearly working on developing a number of climate finance instruments, and we have come a considerable distance in this process, both in terms of developing the sustainable finance regime, as well as products and instruments. However, the process is, we all agree, time consuming. On the other hand, while we are working on the climate finance regime and the products, His Excellency the President Ranil Wickremesinghe is keen to work collectively with other climate vulnerable developing countries on securing faster and more direct financing for green investments. Many climate vulnerable countries feel that there should be an alternate parallel global mechanism for fast-tracking crucial aspects of climate negotiation. In this context, Sri Lanka believes that there should be a greater climate justice and equity in the whole process of climate negotiation. Sri Lanka considers that debt justice must be factored in as an essential component in the overall package of solutions that should be made available for climate vulnerable nations for their mitigation and adaptations interventions. We hope to process that debt cancellation. Of course, this write-off should happen immediately. I think should be strongly considered an immediate help for vulnerable developing countries already struggling to source and free up financial resources for adaptation and mitigation project. It should be explored in conjunction to new and additional finance for loss and damage. Many global south countries are curtailed from responding to mounting climate costs, as every year they must commit substantial sums of government reserves to pay creditors every year. So to take this dialogue forward, Sri Lanka is proposing to set up the Climate Justice Forum for climate vulnerable developing countries prior to COP28 and make debt cancellation along a strong appeal in the COP28. I wish to make use of this forum to openly invite and request ESCAP to join hands in this effort and support this worthy cause of most climate vulnerable developing countries in the formation of Climate Justice Forum. I wish to ask each and everyone who are involved in this process, thousands of professionals, institutions, and we have been working for this so many years. I just want to ask one question, that have we done justice enough for billions of people who are suffering? Many countries who are struggling to come out. So therefore, why not we take decisions to just write off the debts, cancel some of the debts, and instruct them to follow, invest those in all whatever the process that we are talking about. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ahmed, for sharing your perspectives and very clear ideas how you want to take the conversation forward with some very specific suggestions. Let me now turn to His Excellency Mr. Seve Pinho, Minister of Finance, Tuvalu. Your Excellency, you have represented your country at Glasgow in COP26 and have been a leading advocate for world leaders to urgently transition to renewable energy. Pacific countries have also committed to a fossil fuel-free Pacific. Could you please share your thoughts on how you are setting out to finance this energy transition? And what are some of the key challenges that you are envisaging in this regard? The floor is yours, sir.
Yeah, thank you. I want to preface my response to that question by first of all explaining why mitigation and the just energy transition is important for Tuvalu and for the Pacific Island countries. As you may know, all of the small island developing states, the six, contribute least to the causes of climate change. We contribute less than 0.03 of total emissions. Yet, we are at the brunt of the consequence of climate change impact in terms of the damage and in terms of the cost to adapt and cost to mitigate. So regardless of that, notwithstanding that situation, we in Tuvalu, and I believe in the Pacific Island countries, mitigation and implementing a just energy transition plan over the coming decades is really important for two reasons. One, it is a moral voice to symbolize the importance to the large emitting countries to drastically take ambitious action to reduce their emissions. But also secondly, we are really financially and economically affected due to the increasing prices of fossil fuel, diesel, in our electricity sector and other sectors of our economy. And we see this as an opportunity for us to move away and transition away from fossil fuel with the aim that there are better and cheaper renewable energy opportunities. So let me explain a little bit about the fossil fuel-free Pacific slogan. I and the government of Vanuatu co-hosted a ministerial dialogue in the month of February this year in Vanuatu, discussing about this issue of fossil fuel. And we came out with a Port Vila call for a just transition to a fossil fuel-free Pacific. And just last week, the Ministers of Transport and Energy of the Pacific, through SPC, they endorsed that call. And it will be then be submitted to the Pacific Islands Forum Leaders Meeting at the end of the year to endorse that call. I understand and I believe that this call is quite ambitious. It is something that cannot be done overnight, but it is a step that we need to take nonetheless. For us in Tuvalu and the national governments in the Pacific Island countries, we anticipate that we need to develop, in addition to our own NDC and NDC roadmaps, a very specific just energy transition that identifies all of the actions that needed for our economy to be transformed into a low carbon economy over a period of time. Obviously, it is going to be very challenging. For us in Tuvalu, we have aligned our net zero target in the electricity generation sector, that we would like to transform our electricity generation from fossil fuel diesel based to solar 100% by the year 2030. This is only 7 years. Yet our current electricity power mix is 20% solar. It's a huge challenge in 7 years to be able to achieve that. and likewise with the rest of our Pacific Island states. So the main challenge I see in order to transition away from fossil fuel for us in the Pacific is in terms of technology transfer, capacity development, and lastly, but not the least, financing. And I would like to wrap up my comment around the financing. We have been calling on the international community to assist us and support us with climate and development finance. And we make these points, and I reinforce those points in this platform. The climate and development finance needs to be flexible and responsive to our need due to the unique vulnerability and differences of our island states. It must be provided at scale. It must be speed up and needs to be either grant or very concessional based, because already our economies are overcapitalized in terms of debt distress, and we cannot have any further debt financing loaded on our small economies. In fact, on the first morning of this session this week, Professor Sachs summarized it really nicely, that in the review of the global financial architecture, 3 points. It must be responsive to need, at scale, and at speed, and concessional. So those messages are very clear. It's not only the small island developing states have been advocating for them right across. And finally, Tuvalu has been a proponent of calling for a special funding window for SITS. Because I know when we developed this modality for the loss and damage under the UNFCCC, and likewise, I just came out of a couple of weeks ago, the Asian Development Bank governors meeting in Incheon, in Seoul, where they are now transforming the ADB as the Asia Pacific Climate Bank. We won't be able for Tuvalu and the small island developing states to benefit unless there is a special funding window consideration given to the plight and the unique vulnerabilities of the SITS. Thank you, moderator.
Thank you very much, Excellency, for again very clear articulation of your ideas. Let me now invite our next panelist, Her Excellency Ms. Shia Sere, Deputy Governor, National Bank of Cambodia. Your Excellency, central banks, as we know, are in a powerful position to support the development of green finance models and enforce the adequate pricing of environmental and carbon risks. As an emerging leader in sustainable finance, what priorities or actions has National Bank of Cambodia already taken, and how is National Bank of Cambodia positioning itself to integrate climate consideration in its policies and strategies going forward? The floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Mr. Malik, and good morning to Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen in this forum. Also, thank you to ESCAP for inviting Cambodia to have a voice here on this panel. But first, I would like to set the context about Cambodia. We are a country of low emitter of carbon dioxide with under 1 metric ton per capita compared to the average of 7 tons in the OECD countries. We currently, our energy mix is 40% from renewable sources, composing mainly of hydropower, being blessed with a geographically abundant of flowing rivers. Now, while the current emission is low, this is expected to pick up as the economy develops and the population urbanize. And Cambodia mitigation effort is therefore to less focus on cutting current emission or transitioning, but more on ensuring that new power sources are to fuel growth are clean. Now, in terms of the financing need in Cambodia, we've assessed to about 8 billion in financing. This is a drop in the ocean compared to what the developed countries commit at the last COP26 of 100 billions. So hopefully, you know, we're able to access this funding sometime in the future. And therefore, not just relying on funding from this fund, but also we want to do something ourselves as a small countries as well. We can't just, we all live on the same boat. If, you know, there's a climate catastrophe somewhere in the Pacific, eventually it will come through to Cambodia. So, I mean, if somebody sink, we all sink. I mean, if Earth got destroyed, it's everyone on Earth. So we need to do something in our own capacity as well, and this is where, you know, we need concerted effort. Now, as financial regulator, as central bank, it is very difficult to prioritize, right? As a central bank, each central bank has its specific mandates on financial stability, on price stability, and so we need to ensure that whatever additional mandate we took on do not jeopardize or put at risk the main mandates that were set to us by the parliament. But the National Bank of Cambodia, we come up with the ideas that so far we have already embraced financial inclusion and financial literacy as our mandate because it's important as part of the price stability and financial stabilities. Now, why not also include the climate change financing? Now, this the reason why we've decided that we should embrace that as our mandate as well, is that Cambodia is among the countries most at risk of climate change. We rank number 8 in the World Risk Index 2016. That's probably the only single ranking that is not so good. And agriculture is one of our main growth pillar. And so the issue of climate change is something that we take in seriously, as I mentioned. We want to make it part of our mandate as well. We collaborate numerous times with ESCAP and different agencies, first to raise awareness about climate change. This is something that is probably more understood in developed countries, but in developing countries, when you lack development, when you lack food on the table, when you don't have logistic and transportation, this is probably something that the investors or the people are not so much aware. So raising awareness is important. We go on to have an MOU with our Ministry of Environment and also bringing in the associations of banks to share information, to share training, to have trainings together on this matter. Recently, we also work with ESCAP to come up with a report on green and sustainable financing market analysis that is going to be launched later this year. And in the pipeline, we're looking into developing a roadmap and a vision for sustainable finance. We're also working on a taxonomy of green financing or sustainable financing. And this is really a very sort of difficult subject to manage, because first you need a definition to make sure that everyone is on the same page. Second, you need collaboration, not just within the countries, but also across the region. A project that is green in Cambodia is not necessarily green for the entire region or for the world. I mean, we can take an example of a hydropower upstream somewhere, which is considered green in that particular country, but if it's sort of stop or slow the flow downstream and affect the biodiversity of fishes, of marine life in the lower part of the region, then would you consider that green? Also, on a matter of between green and sustainability, a coal plant is necessary, for instance, for Cambodia to meet its energy needs, but it's not green. And at the same time, we have to balance that the people are desperately need for access to energy. And so in this case, how do we define, coal power plant? Should we finance it because it's sustainable, because it helps people access to electricities and have a better livelihood, but then at the same time, it's not green, it's not renewable energy. So that is something that we need a lot of work to be done. Before I end on this, I would like to touch on something which is probably slightly different from earlier panelists, which is on the importance of financing climate change adaptation. Cambodia, and I think along most emerging economies, are low emitter of CO2, and therefore working on cutting emission is not as pressing as it is for industrialized nation. We need to step up our effort to manage the physical risk for damages to infrastructure and ensure less disruptions and loss of economic output, especially in the agriculture sector. We need fund to build new water canal, rerouting the roads, build new bridges over new flood-prone area, and for farmers to adapt new method of farming and purchase more climate resilient crop. These are important elements that I think so far has been neglected. Understandably, a lot of the focus has been on cutting emission because most of the platforms are mainly led by industrialized countries representative, and this is understandable because this is a priorities for them. But we also need to look at the actual needs of emerging and developing economies in terms of adapting to this climate change. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ray. Very clear. Let me now invite Ms. Shavinda Hanratanakool, Chairman, Association of Investment Management Companies, Thailand. Ms. Hanratanakool, by some estimates, the total value of assets under management in Thailand is about 4.8 trillion baht, or $150 billion. As the chairman of the Association of Investment Management Companies in Thailand, what trends do you see in how this private finance is shifting to financing green or climate-related projects? And how can we accelerate this? The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for having me on this stage among the excellencies. Actually, I will talk about, because a lot of excellency talking about the policy and all that, but in terms of industry, in terms of association, what we are doing, we kind of body between demand and supply. Demand is meaning the issuer who issue the green bond equity part, and we bridging that to the investor, meaning that we try to find funding through the investor for the issuer who wants to go for green bonds or who wants to go for the what's so called ESG. The industry has been developed for a while, and as an association, we cannot come this far, not meaning that we come this far and we still have a long way to go for on the sustainability issue. We have to thank for the regulators and government body, government agency who supporting us and who try to activate or try to accelerate in terms of ESG in Thailand. And without them, I don't think we can raise the fund this far. But actually, to be honest, the fund size that's raising in Thailand is still minimal. We still have a long way to go. Why? Because actually, what we are doing at the moment, we look at ourselves in 4 dimensions. One is we have to build the infrastructure first, policy and process. And we have to raise the fund. We have policy and process, but doesn't mean anything if you don't have raising. We don't have funding or we don't have investor to invest in this area. And we have to be able to improve in terms of professional skill in terms of ESG. And also communication, that what is the most important thing that we have doing at the moment. So firstly, I want to talk about the infrastructure first, because we come to this part and the latest one that the SEC announced is they introduce climate change, climate risk for us, for fund manager to follow by voluntary basis. And this is very new one that we are being introduced to work on it as a fund manager. What we are doing in the past, we just gradually move. We have been in this area for more than 6 years. Still, I think to myself, is still young. We are still young in this area. But anyway, we go very fast in this sense. We have been talking about the policy regulation that has to cope with the ESG, climate sustainable issue. And we have done internally, we, as an association, we set up the committee, what we call is policy, ESG policy and collective action committee to cope with all the issues that has related in terms of listed company who may expose themselves into climate risk in terms of all the things that are related on this issue. And this has been very active and very good combination and have a highly participation among members. We have done a lot of things like we laid down foundation in terms of ESG framework, been supported by our partner, offshore and onshore as well. And they been very supported by SEC, and now it's one report. One report, it meaning that the listed company has to fill in the form with regard to E, S, and G. And that information will be very good to use by the investment company like us. And not only that, but SET as a government arms or government agency, they try to develop a system to derive the information from one report. It's like a machine readable and derive the information, all that into that system and put it, and coming out by the result is we have ESG qualify, the company qualify as an ESG. That is the thing that fund manager like us demand for it. So the system has been laid down, and so we are ready to move on. Even though there is already at that moment, we still, as a collaboration among the member of the industry, we set up the fund with regard to ESG in the past, and until now we are moving on that part. So what we are trying to do is try to raise fund for our investor so far, but not only for the general term, but in terms of pension fund or provident fund, we offer that product into the member, for our investor as well. The product we offer is quite a wide range of product, but product in Thailand, because of in the past we don't have a strong foundation or strong infrastructure, so we gradually move in terms of raising fund. So the fund is still far away to what we expect to raise in the future. So what we are doing is we try to offer on shelf to investor in terms of foreign investment funds that in global market there are a lot of things in relation to the ESG. So that's the thing we have done. And in terms of our association, we try to improve in terms of professional skill. We have a refresher course that to improve in terms of ESG, build awareness from among the members, and particularly for the fund manager, analyst, and also advisor. Lastly, we are pretty much concerned on communication. We have product, we have foundation, we have all this in the industry, but it won't happen if we don't have a good communication with our investor, particularly for the young generation. So what we are doing at the moment, we discuss this. Is quite an issue, a big issue between us association, also the regulator, and also the SET and SET. to how to communicate to the young generation well enough for them to be aware. That is the issue that important for our our Thai society at the moment. So all the things that we have done, we have infrastructure in place. We raise the fund for our investor, but the thing still obstacle is the green bond because of the supply is not enough. Maybe because a lot of issue that the issue don't want to go for it because it's kind of resources consumed when they want to go for green bond. Even though there is a dialogue between the SEC and the issue, but still a lot of things that it has to be improved and it has to be facilitated or helped by the government or by the association and by the regulator as well. I stop for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hanratanakul, for sharing very specific examples from Thailand. Let me now invite Mr. Alexei Miroshnichenko, First Deputy Chairman, State Development Corporation, VEB.RF. Mr. Miroshnichenko, VEB.RF has been building a green finance market in line with fulfilling Russia's commitment to Paris Agreement, and VEB.RF has already released the Russian Green Finance Guidelines and Russian National Taxonomy for green projects. In terms of financing innovations such as green hydrogen and carbon capture and storage, what role will VEB.RF be playing? What advice would you have for others in sequencing and setting priorities regarding financing climate action?
Thank you very much, Mr. Malik, Your Excellencies, dear colleagues. Thank you very much for an opportunity to share our insights and experience in developing a national green taxonomy and actually finding an maybe not optimal but a good mixture and balance between green projects and projects those have significant CO2 emission effects. And maybe this is an answer to the question that Your Excellency Ms. Chesrey asked about that some projects may be not green but efficient, and some are efficient but some are not efficient but green. I will switch to Russian for the major of my speech, so I would kindly ask you to use the translation and your headsets. Российская Федерация поставила цель достичь углеродной нейтральности к 2060 году и следует этой цели. Для этого требуется реализовать ряд технологических проектов и найти деньги для их финансирования. Российское Министерство экономики составило стратегию углеродного перехода и определило те технологии, которые необходимо внедрить для достижения цели углеродной нейтральности. Мы также проанализировали, какие из этих проектов могут окупиться сами, без дополнительных субсидий и государственной поддержки, а какие не окупятся и потребуют расходовать деньги из бюджета. Сейчас наша зеленая таксономия и то, что делала Государственная корпорация развития, фокусируется на тех примерно 20-25% проектов, которые экономически эффективны и самостоятельны и могут быть реализованы уже сейчас без мер поддержки. Мы разработали механизм национальных зеленых критериев зеленых финансовых инструментов, кредитов и облигаций. Хочу сразу отметить, что мы сделали этот документ более технически наполненным, более подробным, чем широко используемые на мировых финансовых рынках стандарты ICMA и CBI. Для того, чтобы обеспечить более точное и специфичное применение на российском рынке. Также мы определили процедуру верификации, аккредитовали локальных верификаторов, которые могут взаимодействовать с российскими эмитентами и инициаторами проектов на русском языке, разбирать их русскоязычную документацию и выпускать подробные, понятные для российских инвесторов русскоязычные отчеты о климатических и экологических эффектах проектов, которые финансируются. В ходе этой работы мы отметили, что наиболее используемые в мире стандарты CBI и ICMA можно назвать пуристскими. И те технологии, которые большинством экспертов признаются как зеленые, не позволят полностью реализовать всю ту экономическую модель большой страны, имеющей производство, в том числе в базовых отраслях экономики, как Россия. И наоборот, в российской экономике, в наших производствах, а также в наших системах теплоснабжения и транспорта может быть реализовано большое количество технологий, которые существенно снижают выбросы углекислого газа, но с точки зрения общепринятой терминологии зелеными не являются. И для таких технологий мы выделили отдельную главу в нашей национальной таксономии и назвали ее адаптационная. Таким образом, в нашей национальной таксономии, которая одобрена и утверждена правительством, есть два раздела. Первый раздел – зеленое финансирование, то есть те технологии, те проекты, которые были бы признаны зелеными в соответствии с наиболее используемыми в мире стандартами. И вторая глава – адаптационные технологии и проекты. Проекты, которые позволяют достичь значительного эффекта на снижение углеродных выбросов и достижение углеродной нейтральности Российской Федерации. Наш результат за 1,5 года с сентября 2021 года у нас выпущено зеленых и адаптационных инструментов на $6,4 миллиарда. 2/3 этих инструментов выпущены эмитентами с рейтингом на уровне суверенного качества, суверенного рейтинга Российской Федерации. У нас работают 12 независимых верификаторов. И благодаря детальной процедуре верификации, которую ВЭБ разработал, мы, и реестр этих инструментов есть на сайте ВЭБ.РФ, мы точно знаем, сколько тонн углекислого газа сокращают эти проекты. За 1,5 года обеспечено сокращение 10,5 миллионов тонн выбросов углекислого газа ежегодно. И особо хочу отметить, что сокращение 1 тонны в рамках зеленых проектов, то есть тех самых пуристских технологий, стоит по нашим проектам $32 за 1 тонну. А сокращение 1 тонны углекислого газа в рамках адаптационных проектов стоит $1. То есть, если мы говорим про углеродную нейтральность, и нам важен результат, а не соответствие слову «зеленый», адаптационные проекты позволяют достичь этого результата гораздо дешевле и более эффективно. Перейду обратно на английский. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and we're happy to share our materials, we're happy to share our deliverables. You can find our documents both in Russian and in English on our website veb.ru. And also you can find the list of our green instruments if this may be interesting for any of your investors. So verified, sovereign grade, green bonds. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Miroshnichenko, for sharing very specific work that is going on in Russia. Let me now invite our last, but certainly not the least, speaker, Mr. Koichiro Ushima, Managing Executive Officer, MUFG Bank, Japan. Mr. Oshima, the MUFG is not only Japan's largest bank with $3.3 trillion in assets, it is also one of the world's top 10 largest banks. As a leader, MUFG has committed to achieve net zero emissions in their finance portfolio by 2050. These commitments have significant and positive implications for reducing financing of coal power. Could you please highlight how you are approaching the reduction of financing of coal power and how other banks should be thinking about this? The floor is yours.
Can you hear me? Thank you very much for the question, and thank you very much for inviting me to the panel today. Very much honored today. It is true that MUFG has committed to achieve net zero by 2050 for our financing emissions. However, Let me first touch upon our underlying philosophy of our transition strategy. As you have indicated, our balance sheet is around $3 trillion. And given the systemic size of it, our balance sheet reflects the underlying economy of Japan and some of the Asian countries where we have large exposures to. So this implies two things. First, we cannot achieve financed emission net zero without the real economy achieving net zero. And second, our transition cannot go much faster than the real economy transition itself. Now, this does not mean that we are waiting for the real economy to transition to a low carbon economy. Rather, we are actively engaging with our clients to help their transition. And in doing so, we are respectfully challenging their transition plans to make sure such plans are credible. We believe that financial institutions like ourselves can be a powerful enabler of transition. We are not in the driver's seat ourselves, but when it comes to real economy decarbonization, we have an important role to play. The role to finance credible transition plans, which requires proactive client engagement to assess the transition plan working with our clients. Now, with respect to the question on coal-fired power plants, it is easy to say that we should shut them down right away. But as a practitioner, I want to offer an approach that is a little more ambitious and yet inclusive. It is said to be there are more than 4,700 power plants, coal-fired power plants in Asia alone. And these power plants provide electricity to the businesses and the households in each of those regions. No pathway towards net zero will be identical, and each region has its own unique challenges. And especially for Asia, it has to deal with increasing energy demand for the growth of the region. Now, in order to solve the issue, renewables will definitely will play a key role. Yet, renewables on its own can only be effective if there is a strong grid infrastructure and which is complemented by baseload electricity. This is why we are pushing for a combination of renewable and carbon-free power plants using the existing infrastructure so that we can accelerate energy transition while securing stable energy supply. As it has been mentioned, GFANZ is developing a framework called Managed Phase Out of Coal-Fired Power Plants, and pilot programs such as JETP in Indonesia and Vietnam that GFANZ is undertaking and which MEFG is part of, is proactively trying to solve the issues. Under the JETP, we're not just trying to finance renewable energy, but also we are trying to induce private money into the managed phase out of coal-fired power plants. Obviously, there are a lot of issues surrounding this, and I'm working on this every day, and hopefully we'll come up and be able to announce a tangible progress in the next few months. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Oshima, for very clear messages how things are taking shape in Japan under your leadership in the MUFG Bank. I'm very conscious of the time here. I do have a set of follow-up questions, and I wanted to take advantage of the presence of so many distinguished panelists. But I think in the interest of time, we want to have country statements as well from the floor. So let me please thank our panelists once again for setting aside time and joining us in the conversation today, sharing very specific, very clear insights on the subject. And I hope everybody not only just enjoyed the clarity of thought, but also benefited in terms of getting some interesting ideas for practical implementation. So let me now hand over the floor back to the chair for country statements, please. Thank you, panelists.
Thank you, Director Malik, and all distinguished panelists for this very productive and insightful discussion. So, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, let us continue our deliberations. Now I open the floor for brief country interventions. I would like to urge all speakers to limit their interventions to 2 minutes. Delegations in the room called upon to speak would speak from their country seat, while delegations online would need to click the raise hand button on Zoom. So we have speakers list. I would like to give the floor to the distinguished delegates of China. China, you have the floor.
谢谢主席女士。中国已宣布力争2030年前碳达峰，2060年前碳中和的双碳目标。我们将用世界历史上最短的时间，完成全球最高碳排放强度的降幅。中国正采取坚定有力的积极措施，来实现双碳目标。我们已经取得实实在在的进展和成果。中国大力发展绿色金融，截至2021年底，支持金融机构向碳排放领域发放符合要求的贷款1425亿元，带动年度碳排放2876万吨二氧化碳当量。中国稳妥推进全国碳市场建设，全国碳排放权交易市场启动1周年，碳市场碳排放配额累计成交量1.94亿吨，累计成交额达84.92亿元。中国深化应对气候变化南南合作，已经累计安排超过12亿元人民币用于开展气候变化的南南合作，与38个发展中国家签署43份应对气候变化南南合作文件，为120多个发展中国家培训了约2000名气候变化领域的官员和技术人员。国际社会应坚持共同但有区别的责任原则，发达国家应该率先大幅减排，向发展中国家提供气候变化、清洁能源等技术转移支持。在气候融资方面，发达国家应该向发展中国家提供足额、透明、可验证的气候融资和援助，帮助他们更好应对气候变化。这既是发达国家不可推卸的道义责任，也是其在联合国气候变化框架公约和巴黎协定下必须履行的国际义务。中方愿继续与各方一道，携手应对气候变化的挑战。谢谢。
Thank you, China. The next speaker is going to be Mr. Oliyom Tuishev, Director of the Agency for Innovative Development under the Ministry of Higher Education, Science and Innovations of the Republic of Uzbekistan, and then followed by the United States.
Thank you very much. Distinguished delegates, dear ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to stand before you today as the Director of the Agency of Innovative Development of the Republic of Uzbekistan. We gather here at the 79th session of the Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific to address one of the most pressing challenges of our time, catalyzing climate finance and investment. The climate change is not a distant threat, it's a reality that we face today. Its impacts are felt across the globe, threatening our economies and the well-being of our people. As responsible global citizens, it's our duty to take bold and decisive action to combat climate change and foster sustainable development. Central to this endeavor is the mobilization of climate finance and investment on an unprecedented scale. Uzbekistan is fully committed to addressing climate change and building a sustainable future. Nowadays, climate change and green innovation have become one of the indispensable topics. In addition, developed countries, international organizations, and scientific research companies are paying more attention to the creation and implementation of green innovations. On May 12, 2023, by the President of the Republic of Uzbekistan, a decree was adopted on measures to introduce a system of green energy certificates. In accordance with this decision, on green energy certificate confirms the production of 1,000 kilowatt of electricity and income from the sale of green energy certificates is exempt from the profit tax. Uzbekistan recognized that the climate finance is crucial in supporting the implementation of our climate action plans. However, we also acknowledge that the magnitude of investment required exceeds the resources available to us. Hence, we must strengthen the international cooperation and forge strategic partnership to unlock the necessary financial flows. Today, I would like to propose a comprehensive approach to catalyzing climate finance and investment, which rests on the three key pillars. Firstly, we need to enhance the enabling environment to climate finance. This involves developing clear and transparent regulatory frameworks that promote sustainable investment and attract private sector engagement. We must prioritize policies that provide incentives for green investment, such as tax breaks, subsidies, and green bonds. Additionally, we should strengthen the financial institutions' capacities to assess climate risks and integrate climate consideration into their decision-making processes. By fostering a supportive ecosystem for climate finance, we can create a stable and attractive investment landscape that encourages both domestic and international actors to allocate resources toward sustainable projects. Secondly, we must bolster international cooperation and collaboration. Climate change knows no border, and neither should our efforts to combat it. We call upon development countries, international financial institutions, and the private sector to increase their support for climate finance in developing countries. This includes scaling up concessional finance, technology transfer, and capacity building initiatives. Together, we can pool our resources, share knowledge, and promote South-South cooperation to address the funding gap and accelerate the transition to a low-carbon and climate-resilient future. Thirdly, innovation and technology play a crucial role in unlocking climate finance and investment. We must invest in research and development to foster breakthrough innovations that can drive the transition of low-carbon and climate-resilient economy. This requires nurturing a culture of innovation, promoting entrepreneurship, and supporting startups and small, medium-sized enterprises working on climate solutions. Moreover, we should leverage digital technologies to facilitate access to finance and develop innovative financial instruments tailored to the needs of climate-related projects. By the harnessing of the project for innovations, we can unlock new sources of finance, create green jobs, and stimulate economic growth while mitigating the impacts of the climate change. Dear participants and delegates, in conclusion, the time for action is now. Catalyzing climate finance and investment demands our unwavering commitment, collective efforts, and bold leadership. Let us work together to create a sustainable future for our planet and future generations. Uzbekistan stands ready to play its part, and we invite all nations to join us on this transformative journey. By strengthening the enabling environment, enhancing international cooperations, and fostering innovations, we can unleash the full potential of the climate finance and investment to build a resilient and prosperous future. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Uzbekistan. And next intervention will be made by Mr. Tariq Tali, Managing Director for Climate Negotiations and Programs, Office of the Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, United States, and then it followed by the representative from Indonesia.
Well, thank you. And thanks to ESCAP for hosting this important and timely discussion, and to the panelists for some really insightful presentations that certainly we learned from. So we understand that the needs are great, and I can assure you that the Biden administration is deeply focused every day on finding opportunity both to scale up finance and to drive investments to be consistent with the zero emissions and climate resilient future we all want. I just wanted to highlight 3 components that we're focusing on. First, scaling up the supply of climate finance. Second, helping countries create the demand for climate-aligned investments. And third, managing climate-related financial risks. First, in terms of scaling up the supply, we have been ramping up our efforts to help vulnerable communities and countries to undertake the actions that they need. And we have a goal of a 4-fold increase in our climate finance from its previous peak, and we're well on our way to achieving that. The U.S. has also strengthened its engagement with key multilateral climate funds. And just to highlight that we just announced a $1 billion contribution to the Green Climate Fund that is now there, and are working towards our $100 million contribution to the Adaptation Fund. And we continue to be a champion of evolving the MDBs so they're better able to respond to critical global challenges, and very actively focused on securing real progress at this year's annual meeting. We're also acutely aware that climate finance can only be effective if it's accessible. So we're doing a variety of things on that front. We've been championing access for vulnerable countries through the GCF, the MDBs, and other avenues. And we're also supporting efforts to help countries access finance directly. So USAID's Climate Ready project is helping Pacific Island countries become more disaster resilient. And we've been able to mobilize $300 million in public finance to date from our efforts to help them get project finance. Second, creating the demand signals is critical for Paris-aligned finance. And we're focused on this at home through our own large incentives for clean and resilient investments, and also in our efforts to help countries throughout the region create policy environments and policy investments and environments where climate action can thrive. Often this involves bringing investors and decision makers together to realize opportunities. USAID, State Department, and other U.S. government agencies are facilitating a whole range of efforts in the region to do this. And to give you a couple of examples, USAID's Clean Edge Asia initiative has mobilized $6.7 billion in clean energy throughout the Asia-Pacific region. And the U.S. funded Private Investment for Enhanced Resilience, or PEER initiative, is incentivizing private sector investments in climate resilience to 12 developing countries, including Bangladesh, Indonesia, and Vietnam. I just highlight that USAID has an ambitious goal of catalyzing $10 of private sector investment for every $1 that we put into the system, with a goal of catalyzing $150 billion in mobilized finance by 2030. And third, finally, we also need to be taking steps to better manage climate-related risks in the financial system itself. And our Treasury Department and other agencies are supporting a broad range of work in this area, which will help countries and investors to understand the climate risks and benefits of alternative investments. So that's a very important component as well. In conclusion, let me just say that the United States remains deeply committed to supporting you, our partners in Asia and the Pacific, as we take this urgent action to keep the world on a 1.5 degree pathway and to build a climate resilient future for all. And we're happy to talk to any of you individually about these issues over the course of the coming week. Thank you.
Thank you, the United States. Next intervention will be made by Indonesia, Mrs. Raden Siliwati, Director for Multilateral Financing, Ministry of National Development and Planning, and will be followed by India.
Honorable Chair, Excellencies, distinguished colleagues. First of all, I would like to appreciate UN ESCAP Secretariat for insightful, substantive, and timely provision of the summary of the theme study on accelerating climate action in Asia and the Pacific for sustainable development. Let me begin by emphasizing that addressing climate change is a defining challenge of our time. Climate change threatens the very foundation of our planet. It is crucial to recognize that it is not merely an environmental issue, but also a development issue. Our success to tackle this challenging will depend on how we translate our commitments into coherent plans and taking concrete action. It is undeniable that fulfilling these commitments will not only require us to rethink our values, choices, and priorities. For developing countries, it is also requires a significant increase in finance and investments, and attaining it has its own barriers. Those barriers include market infrastructure that has yet to be fully developed, limitation of financial instruments, real and perceived risks, as well as limited capacity of market and financial institutions. Indonesia acknowledges these challenges but remains committed to taking tangible actions. We aim to build an ecosystem that encourages private investment in financing the transition towards low carbon and climate resilient development pathway through several efforts. First, Indonesia has consistently strengthened regulation related to the green investment and formulated policies that drive sustainable finance practices by equipping it with clear criteria and measurable environmental aspects. Since 2017, Indonesia's Financial Service Authority has encouraged companies to submit sustainability reports, and in early 2022, they published the first edition of Green Taxonomy to guide the financial services sector in developing a portfolio of financial products and or services. Second, Indonesia has established both physical and non-physical incentives for green investment, such as through tax allowance, import duty exemption, tax holiday, and zero sales tax on luxury goods for electric vehicles. Lastly, Indonesia has actively promoted and implemented the use of innovative financing mechanisms that can catalyze climate change finance and green investment, particularly through blended finance, which has the potential to shift risks and manage returns in developing countries. During the G20 2022 Indonesian presidency, the G20 has agreed on G20 principle to scale up blended finance in developing countries, including least developed countries and small island developing states. Those principles could help governments to take an active role by building local capital markets, advancing sustainable development priorities, and working closely together with private sectors, and push development cooperation providers to catalyze support in developing countries in terms of financing, capacity building, and policy support. Going forward, Indonesia stands ready to work together for stronger regional cooperation on global climate change mitigation and adaptation efforts, as well as in addressing financing need and technology transfer. I thank you so much.
Thank you, Indonesia. Next, I would like to invite the representative from India, followed by Russian Federation.
Thank you for the floor, Madam Chair. Good morning to all. Madam Chair, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Climate change is a global phenomenon and requires collective efforts. This has been widely accepted and is the basis of the commitments in the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and its Paris Agreement. Recognizing the differentiated responsibility of countries and the higher developmental needs of the developing countries, it calls for a collective action based on the principles of equity and common but differentiated responsibility and respective capabilities. Madam Chair, to meet the targets set by developing countries in their nationally determined contributions, resources in the range of $6 trillion to around 11 trillion are estimated to be required till 2030. While the need is immense, the flow of funds from the developed members to developing members, as mandated under the Paris Agreement, has been low. India believes that financing of climate action must follow the principles of CBDRRC and equity in accordance with the framework of UNFCCC and its Paris Agreement. As finance flows are required for global public goods and for the development priorities of the concerned countries, it is critical that flow of resources for global public goods does not enhance the debt burden of the developing countries or impact their development priorities adversely. Therefore, developed countries and multilateral development banks need to play a lead role in enabling flow of such resources at grant and at concessional level. India has integrated its development goals with ambitions and ambitious climate action goals, be it in the form of augmented solar power capacity or improved green cover facilitated by Green India Mission, among other targeted government actions. In terms of transition to renewable energy sources, India has already achieved its target of 40% installed electric capacity from non-fossil fuels ahead of 2030. It has advanced the target to 50%, which shall also translate to a significant reduction in the average emission rate. The National Hydrogen Mission and Green Hydrogen Policy have been introduced to enable India to be energy independent by 2047. And as such, finance is a critical input for climate actions initiated by India as well. The availability of adequate and affordable finance remains a constraint in India's climate actions, and so far finance requirements have been met from domestic sources only. Madam Chair, India has scaled up its efforts towards mobilizing private capital, including through sovereign green bonds, to meet climate action goals. Though India has so far undertaken climate actions on its own, the expectations of further large-scale climate measures need to be equated with the enhanced initiatives by developed countries in terms of providing means of implementation, including finance, technology transfer, and capacity building support. Let me conclude by saying that India reiterates its support to regional solidarity and cooperation to address the environmental challenges in the Asia-Pacific, and also appreciate the recommendations and policy options suggested in the summary of theme study for accelerating climate action in Asia and the Pacific for sustainable development. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all.
Thank you, India. Next intervention will be made by Russian Federation and then followed by Bangladesh.
Благодарю вас, госпожа председатель. У меня нет заготовленного выступления, но я хотел сказать бы несколько слов по теме сегодняшней дискуссии. Первое. Я хотел бы поблагодарить секретариат за формат организации дискуссии, когда достаточно времени остается для государств-участников высказать свои соображения по итогам начальной дискуссии. Это очень важно. Именно это позволяет дистиллировать реальные, практически значимые идеи, которые могут быть применены в Азиатско-Тихоокеанском регионе. Теперь по существу. Действительно, дискуссия показала актуальность темы мобилизации 100 миллиардов долларов для климатического финансирования, выполнение тех обязательств, которые взяли на себя развитые страны под эгидой рамочной конвенции по климату и Парижскому соглашению. Как известно, Российская Федерация в терминах рамочной конвенции ООН и Парижского соглашения не несет финансовых обязательств в юридическом смысле. Вместе с тем, здесь, на площадке ESCAP, мы стараемся вносить свой вклад в решение климатических проблем за счет использования российского добровольного взноса. И, как известно, сейчас под эгидой ESCAP идет реализация проекта по повышению потенциала развивающихся стран по выполнению методологических требований Парижского соглашения. Мое внимание также привлек ряд высказываний уважаемых панелистов. Действительно, вряд ли можно спорить с тем, что актуальной задачей современного этапа является продвижение так называемого общеправительственного подхода, whole of the government approach. И действительно, в рамках такого подхода Министерство финансов могли бы выполнять роль локомотива в разработке стратегических инициатив по наращиванию климатического финансирования, прежде всего для решения национальных целей, как в области климата, и в целом по всему спектру целей устойчивого развития. Мы также обратили выступление на те тезисы, которые были озвучены рядом панелистов. Вот мой взгляд привлекли высказывания, в частности, представителей Тувалу и Камбоджи, министра финансов Тувалу и заместителя управляющего Центрального банка Камбоджи. Действительно, они говорили о том, что нам требуется продвижение разносторонних подходов. Применение различных подходов. Действительно, one size fits all не всегда подходит. И вот эти стратегии, как говорил министр финансов из Тувалу, они должны быть достаточно гибкими и учитывать национальные потребности. Это действительно то, что мы хотели бы подчеркнуть, и мы считаем важным учет национальных особенностей государств. И в заключение я бы хотел сказать, что именно в этом ключе шли те же высказывания, озвученные представителем Российского внешнеэкономического банка. Совершенно верно. Который подчеркнул о том, что, например, в нашей стране сейчас мы, несмотря на те сложности, которые сейчас в целом, так сказать, сопряжены с общей геополитической обстановкой, мы реализуем цели по обеспечению низкоэмиссионного развития. В этой связи разработана соответствующая таксономия. Что важно и что меня поразило, когда я разговаривал с нашим представителем вчера вечером, что действительно в той классификации, которая есть, часть проектов, которые относятся, строго говоря, к пуристически квалифицируемым проектам of projects, затраты составляют $32 на снижение эквивалента эмиссий. А так называемые адаптационные проекты затраты составляют $1. Посмотрите, это как раз смыкается с тем, о чем, как я понимаю, говорил представитель Камбоджи и Тувалу. Мы должны учитывать вот этот, продвигать так называемый всеобъемлющий комплексный подход, учитывающий различные стратегии. Цель одна, стратегии разные. Вот это, на мой взгляд, было бы очень важным. Спасибо большое. Мне кажется, было бы очень полезным именно такое живое участие делегации в разговоре. Спасибо.
Thank you very much, Russia. And now I would like to invite Bangladesh and Japan. Please limit your intervention within 2 minutes since we are almost noon this morning. So Bangladesh, please.
Respected Chair, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. You know that Bangladesh is particularly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, including sea level rise, floods, and cyclones. We must take action to mitigate these impacts and ensure a sustainable future for our country. One way to address this challenge is through catalyzing climate finance and investment. This involves mobilizing private and public funds to finance projects that reduce greenhouse gas emissions and build climate resilience. Bangladesh has several opportunities to climate finance and investment, including renewable energy, sustainable agriculture, and resilient infrastructure. However, there are also several challenges such as lack of access to finance and limited technical capacities. Bangladesh, despite being a highly climate vulnerable country, while contributing less than 0.48% of total global emissions, wants to actively play its part in the global collective action to reduce future greenhouse gas emissions. And for this reason, we take a major success and ongoing initiatives on low carbon developments in our country. Excellencies, the government of Bangladesh has also expressed its willingness to be energy independent through maximizing renewable energy shares in the total energy mix as part of its Mujib Climate Prosperity Plan 2022 to 2041. This plan has targeted to install 4 gigawatt of offshore wind generation by 2030. It has also seen hydrogen energy as an opportunity to achieve energy independence in the country and become a net energy exporter in the future. Distinguished guests, let me now focus our attention towards adaptation. Recently, the country has formulated the adaptation plan and submitted to the UNFCCC, which has significantly enhanced our adaptation ambition. The NAP primarily identified 113 interventions, including 90 high priority and 23 moderate priority that encompasses 8 sectors and considers 11 climatic stress areas. For the implementation of this NAP, the government will require around $230 billion of US dollar for the period of 2023 to 2050. That is more than $8 billion US dollar per year over the next 27 years as new and additional financing requirements. So we consider there are huge opportunities for climate finance and investment in our energy sector, particularly in our renewable energy sector. Also, there are opportunities for investment in various sectors that are identified in our national adaptation plan. However, we need to strengthen our institutional frameworks and policies to support climate finance and investment. We also need to build the capacity of our financial institutions and private sector to access and manage this climate finance effectively. Distinguished guests, additionally, we need to engage the international cooperation and collaboration to access global climate finance resources and knowledge sharing. This can be achieved through partnership with multilateral institutions such as Green Climate Fund, World Bank, as well as with other private sector investors. Excellencies, catalyzing climate finance and investment in Bangladesh is crucial for building our country's sustainable and resilient future. By strengthening our institutional frameworks, building capacity, and engaging in international cooperation, we can unlock the potential for climate finance and investment to contribute to our national development goals. We have in place a lot of plans to combat our climate effects. Now it's time to act, and now it's time to mobilize the climate finance towards the developing countries. Thank you all.
Thank you, Bangladesh, for your intervention. Next, Japan, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Japan recognizes as a Pacific island that climate change-induced natural disasters are serious and urgent ongoing threats, especially for low-lying states and small island development states. We see these issues as a matter of national security as well as human security. Bearing this in mind, as we said on day one, Japan is intent on continuing to assist climate vulnerable states, especially LDCs and SIDS, to help close the financial gap in taking relevant action. We've been fulfilling our obligations for years as one of the founding contributors and largest donors to the Global Environment Facility and the Green Climate Fund, among others, and contributing actively to the multilateral debate to channel increasing share of concessional finance to climate vulnerable states and facilitating their access. Through our resource mobilization strategies, we have emphasized mobilization of resources from all sources, public, private, and philanthropic, with the understanding that such an approach is essential in de-risking our transition toward a greener economy. As things stand, we are set on a path to steadily implement our financial commitment of providing up to 70 billion US dollars, both from public and private sources, over the 5 years through 2025, despite rising fiscal challenges amid today's uncertain economic environment. Japan also emphasizes support related to climate adaptation and recently added further contributions to the Adaptation Fund this March and urged especially climate vulnerable Pacific Island countries to proactively apply for funding with proposals that would contribute to enhancing their adaptation capacities. Our stance is to help provide an enabling environment for a climate and environmentally resilient future, and would like to do so in alignment with the SDGs and in respect to national circumstances and agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Japan. I'm pleased to invite last speaker, Youth Representative. So Ms. Prim, Youth Representative, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much for giving youth their opportunity to speak. I would like to thank you to all the panelists for your great, insightful discussions. And my name is Prim Rajasarang Wongkrasamongkon. I am representing youth in all their diversities into catalyzing climate finance with youth and youth projects and better investment. We are living in an ecosystem and in communities around the world that has been interconnected and are being severely impacted by climate change today. The youth can create local events that can have impact on global impact. And the risk on the ocean is a risk in every life. We, the youth, are calling for a fiscal policy to help address the climate change in Asia and the Pacific. All of us should be centralized in climate change, biodiversity, and health nexus. Fiscal policy can help to solve the region's air pollution problem that we have spent trillions of dollars in. And healthy is being wealthy. And we also having a recommendations that rising of carbon price and giving a coal tax can further strengthen and save millions of lives and shifting to renewable energy and energy transition and decarbonization. We have a scale of action and international commitment to a race to net zero. And we, the youth, are taking part in the net zero future carbon and energy system. With financial opportunities, we the youth have been implementing projects that it could be scaled up and we can share innovation we have with other countries, with other regions, and everywhere in the world. We call for building a low carbon industries and youth in action to support research and development to creative ideas from youth-led and providing access to green financing. Innovations are the main drivers and have SDG incubators and enhancing impact on innovative process and youth-led entrepreneurship. We are the main driver on creativity work, and please include us into the table for climate action, empowerment, peer learning, training, and upskilling for people. Financing to the climate benefit everyone, and we need to have that bold mechanism for us, for women, youth, people with disability, indigenous people, and everywhere in the world. We need to prevent the climate disaster and investing in small island developing states. We, the youth, are the agents of change, and we need an engagement and empowerment of youth, and let's catalyze finance and partnership with youth to scale up innovation for climate action and leave no one behind. Thank you.
Ms. Prim, thank you for your appealing message. Distinguished delegates, we have finished the discussion on this agenda item. I would like to remind you that this afternoon, there will be a follow-up discussion on the topic of catalyzing climate financing and investment from 1:30 to 2:30 in meeting room A, level 1, to discuss how to prepare better investment-ready pipelines in this region. Just before we adjourn the session for today, may I call on the Secretary of the Commission to make an announcement.
Thank you, Chair. Just a very few announcements and reminders that there's numerous side events that are happening this afternoon, organized by our member states and partners. Most of them are hybrid and open to all participants of the Commission, and of course to visit the Climate Solutions Fair. This afternoon is an opportunity for all delegates to participate in these various events. You are seeing the slides, the side events that will happen this afternoon. I also take this opportunity to remind delegates on the evaluation of the session. As mandated by the Commission, the Secretariat provides delegations with the opportunity to assess the quality and the results of the session through feedback and questionnaire. So in this connection, we would like to request each participant to complete a brief online survey through the link available on the Commission webpage under the Overview tab. And you will also see a signage at the entrance of this conference room providing the link with the survey. You can see the QR code as well in the slides presented at the moment. Thank you for taking the time to provide us with your most valuable feedback. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. This concludes our discussions under Agenda Item 2C. We will resume the discussions tomorrow, Thursday, 18 May at 10 o'clock Bangkok time sharp to take up Agenda Item 4 on the review of the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in Asia and the Pacific and issues pertinent to the subsidiary structure of the Commission. Therefore, the meeting is adjourned.
That's what you're hearing for 3 days. We understand.